The Last Ride of Roy Wilson. Part 3. Let's get straight into that. June 17th, 1887. We camped for the night, without a fire, up a ways on a ridge where we had a half-decent vantage of the town. And through the fog, you could see the glow from the church fire pulsing like a beating heart. Starkman had patched me up about as well as he could, but my new gunshot wound still hurt, something fierce. It was dawn when I finally woke again. The boy we'd taken from the town, Henry, was still trussed up and gagged, although even if he hadn't been, I doubted the little shit would have had the balls to run. And Starkman was fast asleep under a nearby tree while Cooper was keeping low in the brush, watching the dirt road we'd taken into town. He glanced back at me as I sat up and flexed my arm. It still hurt like a son of a bitch, but I could deal with the pain. "How you feeling, Roy?" he asked. "Like shit," I replied. I picked myself up and kept low as I joined him in the brush. It didn't take me long to see what he saw. Horses, about 9 or 10 of them, making their way back the way we'd come. Up in front, I spotted a pale, bony-looking thing that looked as if it had crawled out of a graveyard, and atop of it sat none other than Kenneth herself. And riding up her flank was a mountain of a man. It might have been Jonesy, although this fella still looked to have his whole head intact, as opposed to the broken fragments of bone we'd left him with. I opted not to think about that too much. "Where do you think they're headed?" I asked. "Hell if I know. Back across the border, maybe." Well, that's good, ain't it? Fixes our little issue of jurisdiction. "Yeah, if they're actually going. After last night, I ain't so sure I'm willing to follow them anymore." He spit into the dirt and opened his flask of water for a drink. He offered me some as well. My throat was parched, and I was happy for the drink. "You talked to the boy at all?" I asked as I returned his flask to him. "Tried. He wasn't too chatty last night, but you're welcome to give it a shot, if you feel so inclined." "I just might," I said and stood up. From the corner of my eye, I saw Starkman standing behind us. I hadn't heard him get up, but I knew he was watching Jones, Kenneth, and their associates right off. And judging by the look on his face, he was none too happy about it. "Those rotten little whoresons. Marshal, you got a shot on him?" "Son, we blew Jones' head clean off last night, and he kept on shooting. I'm content to just observe right now if you don't mind," Cooper replied plainly. "The hell you are!" And Starkman went for his pistol and took aim at the distant horses. For a moment I was sure he was crazy enough to pull the trigger, but he just stood there, aiming at those horses before he swore. The rage in his eyes didn't fade though. Instead, they turned on the boy. If Henry had been asleep when I had awoken, the commotion had since woken him up, and he was greeted by a very angry Dr. Starkman coming at him with a 6-gun in hand and a terrible bloodlust. "You," the doc growled as he rolled the boy onto his back and jammed his pistol right up under his chin. "You're gonna tell me where the hell your friends are riding to, or so help me God, you will shake hands with St. Peter today." "I don't know," Henry squealed, sounding more like a pig and less like a man. I swear I don't know." "Then who does?" Starkman growled. Cooper raced to his side to try and put a hand on his shoulder, but the good doctor just pushed him off and gave him a warning glance that made it clear he would not take kindly to an interruption. The marshal had a hand over his pistol, but he didn't draw. "You people clearly have some other business to attend to. What was it?" Starkman asked. Kenneth," Henry stammered. She was looking for something. Some sort of ritual, I think. Said she had to kill the preacher to talk to the old fae and to tell her what she needed." "What ritual?" Starkman snarled. I don't know. I swear. And Starkman kept a gun pressed under his chin as Henry whimpered like a kicked dog. I was almost sure he might shoot the poor bastard, but in time he hosted his peace. Kenneth, was she the one who left that thing at Dick Roberts' place? And Henry tried to sit up, tears and snot running down his face. He managed to nod. She's some sort of doctor. Not like any doctor I've ever heard of, though. A witch, more like. She does things, and with anything dead. Cattle, horses, hell, even people. Cuts them apart and then sews them back together, but not in the same way they were before. She was even doing it to Jonesy, putting things in him and taking them out. Things? I asked, and Henry nodded. Yeah, I saw her cut the heart right out of one of the cattle back at Dick's place. And then she cut open Jonesy and put it in. I seen her take bones, lungs, other things. Jonesy says she's making him stronger. I don't know about that. And Cooper and I traded a look. If we hadn't seen some of Kenneth's work firsthand, I think we both would have thought him insane. And Starkman, on the other hand, just kept an intense eye on the boy. What was your business with Bishop Strickland? He asked. You said Kenneth killed him to try and talk to something, to ask it about this ritual. And again, Henry nodded. The girls in Del Rio said we needed a holy man, not just a preacher, someone higher up. We heard he was abroad, close to the border, and seemed like easy pickings. We looked for him. We found was a telegram sent from some foreign fella, Igor something or other, saying he was coming to visit. And I saw a flash of rage enter Starkman's eyes. So you hit the train he was on? He said quietly, and Henry hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. Starkman, relax. Let's back up a step. Cooper cut in. You mentioned some girls in Del Rio. What girls? Them. Awfully queer group they are. Like Kenneth. I can take it to them. They'll know a hell of a lot more than I do. Well now, son, that is music to my ears, Cooper replied, his smile returning for the first time since we crossed the border. Starkman glanced at Cooper before taking a step back away from Henry. He spat in the dirt beside him before heading down towards the horses. In the distance, Jones and Kenneth were just specks who'd probably long since forgotten about us. They had other places to be, as did we. The trip back across the border was a little nicer than the trip there. We caught Henry free but kept a close eye on him as we rode 2 days back to Del Rio. Our little visit on foreign soil had exhausted us, but we pushed on all the same. When I set foot in Del Rio again, I caught myself breathing easy for the first time since we'd left San Antonio. It was late when Henry led us to the bittersweet brew house, and I imagine that both the doctor and the marshal expected more than a glorified rundown whorehouse. It was a seedy little building right by the water that stank so strongly of alcohol I could smell it from down the street. Cooper stopped dead in his tracks as he laid eyes upon the building, and then looked warily at Harry. Son, exactly what kind of girls are you taking us to see? Not the kind you think, Henry replied meekly. Josie said that whatever you do, it's best not to look 'em in the eye. That's how they get you. Do they now? Starkman scoffed. He drew his eye in again. Boy, if I find out you're trying to trick us. Put that thing away, Doc, Cooper said. I think we've all seen enough of these past few days to have a little faith in our friend here. If it turns out he's leading us on, well, I may not notice if he were to get shot through some unknown means or fall into the river. But we won't know for sure until we see what's in the whorehouse. And Starkman scoffed and reluctantly holstered his gun again. But if mere looks could kill Henry, he would have been dead as a doornail. With his usual vibrant smile, Cooper gestured for Henry to lead us into the brothel, which, for the most part, was no more pleasant inside than it was outside. The men in there were mostly older, haggard gentlemen who had not been treated kindly by life, and yet the women... I can't recall the last time I ever saw so many lovely ladies in one place. They looked young, and with flawless skin and charming smiles. And just looking at them, I almost forgot why I'd come in. Hell, I almost forgot about Sarah at home. And a hand on my shoulder pulled me back to reality. "Don't look 'em in the eye," Henry said, his own eyes wide. "Don't ever look 'em in the eye." Well, Henry Smith, is that you?" A voice rang out behind him. Henry looked over his shoulder slowly to see one of those lovely ladies of the night sauntering towards him. She had silky dark hair and sun-kissed skin, along with a coquettish grin that made my heart throb. I caught Cooper eyeing her up beside me, and I could hardly blame the man. "Hello, Michaela," Henry said quietly, voice shaking as if he were being approached by a hungry lion, and not a beautiful woman. "Back in town so soon, and with new friends to boot. Couldn't stay away, could you?" she asked. Her toothless grin widened as she lovingly caressed his cheek and tried to coax him to look up at her. And to the boy's credit, he followed his own advice and did everything in his power not to look her in the eye. I'm still with Primrose Kennard," he croaked. "And I'm under her protection." "Kennard ain't here, darling, and your friend there is wearing a marshal's badge. I ain't a gambler, but looks to me like you turned traitor. Naughty boy. But I suppose that means no one will miss you." "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt," Cooper began, "but we were just looking to ask you a few questions Michaela's head turned towards Cooper. "Shut up and sit down, cowboy," she said, and soon, as the words were out of her mouth, Cooper went dead silent. Obediently, he pulled up a chair and sat down quietly. And Starkman took a step back from him before glancing at me, unnerved. "You there, wild man, you stink like dead meat. If I had to guess, I'd say you're a hunter by trade. And you, Mr. Mustache, look like neither a lawman nor an outdoorsman. And judging by the smell of you and sling on Mr. Wildman here, I'll assume you're a doctor. Am I correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Starkman said quietly. "You will either walk out of this establishment on your own 2 feet, or you will float on the bottom of the river until your gnawed, bloated carcasses wash up on the beach. Which you'll do depends on how I like your answer to my question, which is, what are you doing in my fine establishment?" It was at that point that from the corner of my eye, I saw one of the drunkards in the corner, sitting with a whore. Only what I hadn't noticed before was the river of fresh blood running down his neck. I watched as the whore sunk her teeth into his wound and seemed to drink down mouthfuls of blood, and I felt my stomach turn. And looking at Michaela in front of me, I could see a row of razor-sharp, shark-like teeth through her slightly parted lips, and I knew that whatever she was, she sure as hell wasn't a prostitute. I caught Stockman studying a pair of whores feeding off an old man near the back and knew he'd figured that out long before I had. "We're looking for Primrose Kennard," I said quietly. "Henry here tells us you might be able to tell us about the ritual she was asking about." "The ritual?" Michaela asked, before scoffing. She fixed her eyes on Henry. "Get us a drink, would you kindly?" Obediently, he shuffled off to fulfill her command, and Michaela pulled out a chair beside Cooper. "Sit down before I make you sit." And Starkman and I didn't need to be told twice. "What's your interest in Kennard?" she asked. I struggled to tear my eyes away from the whore drinking the blood of the dying man in the corner before I managed to answer. "Well, if you care to ask the Marshal, he might tell you that she's wanted for the murder of Bishop John Strickland." I'm not asking the Marshal. I'm asking you, Michaela said. You Egypts are aware that you don't stand a chance in hell of arresting the likes of Kenneth, right? Hell, if she's even still human, I'd be surprised. We're well aware, Stockman said. All the same, she killed a dear friend of mine and left my brother catatonic. We've also had the pleasure of seeing some of her work firsthand. Did you now? Michaela chuckled. And you're still alive. Good for you. I can only imagine what you've seen. Well, when she passed through, I heard her talking about all sorts of nasty beasts. The sort that might make my sisters and I look paltry in comparison. And what exactly are you? If you? I found myself asking as Henry returned to the table. He set our drinks down and stood at attention, with a vacant look on his face, waiting for his next order. Me? I'm a siren. Unlike Kenneth, I was born this way. I didn't need to work for my gifts, and from the sound of it, she certainly has been hard at work. If she's killed the bishop, I can't imagine it will be long before she's completed the ritual she was looking into, assuming she even survives it. And exactly what ritual was that? Stockman asked. It's complicated. I don't suppose either of you are familiar with Charles, are you? Charles. That name sent a shiver through me. The name's popped up, I said, but I don't know what it means. Few do, Michaela said. Supposedly, before reality itself came into being, there was just nothing to say for Mother Void. Now, in due time, Mother Void gave birth to 3 children. First came Celia, the greater god of creation, and well, obviously, they created. Next came Malibo, who became the guardian of all that is. And then finally came Charles, the destroyer. Now, according to old stories, they sort of just run the cycle of reality over and over again. Celia creates it, Malibo tends to it, and when the time comes, Charles destroys it. This is what always has happened. This is what always will happen. No changing it. Now, I've heard of plenty of people who have dealt with Malibo, but not a lot who have dealt with Charles. And guess which camp Kenneth falls into. Sure, I said quietly. Michaela nodded. Yep. Now, she didn't tell me all the details, only that she found a way to contact Charles and strike a bargain to gain power from it, which, if you ask me, is already plain with fire. What Kenneth was looking for when she came to me, though, was something a little, well, stronger. What do you mean, stronger? Stockman asked. There's rituals out there that not even the greater gods want folks to know about. Kenneth heard tales of one that would let her get a little more bang for her buck. Charles gave her a little sip of water, and now Kenneth wants the whole damn river. And I assume that's possible? I asked quietly. Michaela shrugged. If it is, I wouldn't know how to do it, nor would I be quite insane enough to try. But I told her who she could ask. I'll assume you boys aren't familiar with the old Fae, correct? Not exactly, no, I said. They tend to know things that no one else does, and if you offer them something in return, they might just gift you with something good. And so we asked one of the old Fae. Well, that's far easier said than done, wild man. They ain't easy to find, and there's always a catch. A trial, a sacrifice. They don't do handouts. The one Kenneth dealt with only comes when offered the blood of a holy man. And trust me, she picked the easy one. We're not murdering a man to speak to some monster, Stockman said. Especially not another bishop. They can't just be the one nearby. There have to be others. There are, Michaela said. But as I said, this one won't ask for a lesser price. And she paused, thinking for a moment before she continued. There's a pond, not far from here. I can take you. But you best think well and hard before you go. This Fae will want something personal, something you can't stand to lose. Whatever it is, I'll pay it gladly, Stockman said. Michaela just chuckled. Sure you will. That's all I got for you boys. If you're serious about meeting the old Fae, come and meet me here by the river just before dawn. In the meanwhile, I don't give out information for free. She stood up from her chair and patted Henry on the shoulder. He barely moved since delivering the drinks. We'd barely touched. I don't suppose you'll be needing him, will you? He's just what I need. He's heading back to San Antonio when we're done, I said. If it's payment you want, I've got... Take him, Stockman said, cutting me off. And I stared at him in disbelief. Doc, we're not leaving this boy too. He ain't no different than the rest of those thugs riding with Jones. Let her have him, Stockman growled. He's a kid, damn it. We're not leaving him. Michaela just playfully shook her head, watching us bicker. She didn't see Cooper's gun raising out from under the table and pointing right between her eyes. The kid's coming with us, Cooper said calmly. I saw Michaela's brow furrowed in frustration and noticed a few of the other whores stopping their business to watch us. Cooper, put that goddamn gun down, I hissed, only to be ignored. The kid comes with us, Cooper repeated. Ma'am, if you try anything on me again, you'll be dead before you hit the floor. You're a bold one, Cowboy, Michaela said, her voice as level as Cooper's. How long have you been back in it? Long enough. I'll pay you whatever you want in cash right now. But the boy, well, he comes with us. For a few moments, that whole house felt awful quiet. Cooper kept his gun aimed at a woman's head, ready to splatter her brains all over the floor. It felt like years passed before at last she started to laugh. Ho ho ho, I like you, Cowboy, she said. I like you a lot. How about you pay for your drinks and get out? I'll just wait for Henry here next time he passes through. Oh, that sweet young blood won't go too far. Of that, I'm positively certain. She patted him playfully on the behind before turning away from us, still grinning like a wolf. Cooper lowered his gun and dropped it onto the table. For the first time, I noticed he looked downright scared. We didn't linger much longer. I'm sure I've left far more money on the table than we owed, but I'd have preferred to be safe rather than wake up with those horse teeth in my neck. We were barely down the street and with a dazed Henry in tow behind us when Cooper let loose on Stockman. He hit the dock with a slug out of nowhere, hard enough to drop him to the ground. The hell's wrong with you? He snapped at Stockman, laying in the mud. You were going to leave that boy to die? And then what? He's just another thug, Stockman hissed as he picked himself up. His hand moved back towards his gun, but Cooper, well, he drew first. He's a goddamn boy, Stockman. A dumb fucking boy. I'll give you that. But a boy are the same. I get that you're angry. I get it. But you don't decide who lives or dies. Says the man who happily sat by and watched Roy cut a man's throat back in Mexico. Stockman growled. Where exactly do you draw the line? I'll kill a man, Doc. Don't test me on that and you'll find out. But him? He gestured to Henry. What are you, boy? 15? 16? For 14, Henry stammered. He was still a little out of it, and stood stock still and pale. 14? Jesus, Doc. You saw what them girls were doing in there. You were going to let them have a 14-year-old fucking boy? No, I was going to let them have some two-bit thug, Stockman corrected. Do you let every dumb kid you see get away, Marshal? Only the ones I know are making a mistake, Cooper replied. His eyes shifted over towards me before he put his gun away and offered a hand to help Stockman up. Don't make me repeat myself on this, Doc. Are we clear? Well, the doctor hesitated for a moment before taking Cooper's hand. "Crystal," he said, although I could tell he still wasn't all that happy about what had been said. We found a more reputable place to sleep for the night, although I can't say any of us managed to doze off. The images of rivers of blood trickling out of the necks of drunkards and past the ruby-red lips of those sirens was still burned into my mind. Another horrible thing I could have lived my life without seeing, and I knew that it would only be a few hours until dawn when we'd need to see Michaela again. One thing I knew for sure was that if I never walked into Del Rio, Texas again, I would be far too soon. June 18th, 1887. Dawn quickly came, and none of us had slept too well. Either way, we rose early all the same. The ride back to the waterfront was a tense one. Starkman had a shiner blooming on his eye and refused to do so much as look at anyone else, and Henry just hung behind us, quiet like a limping dog. I couldn't blame him. The boy was probably too scared to speak a word to us. I would have been, for sure. We passed out front at a bittersweet brewhouse, which still stank of booze. At dawn the place seemed quieter, although as we reached the shore, I couldn't help but crane my neck to watch the place. Near the back, I could see the shadows of two women carrying something out to the river. From the dark waters, a third figure emerged to take what the first two women had brought her, before carrying it down to the depths. I got a good enough look to know that what they were hiding in the river had likely once been a man. We stopped our horses by the river and waited, none of us quite sure exactly what to expect. We didn't wait for long, though. The sound of approaching hooves drew our eyes a little further down the river, away from the brewhouse, and we watched as a woman on a chestnut horse rode up towards us. At a glance, I hardly recognized Michaela outside of her saloon girl get-up. She donned a straw rancher's hat and a riding skirt, but her wolfish grin looked no different than before. "Good morning, boys," she crooned as she drew nearer to us. "Ma'am," Cooper said quietly, "last night you mentioned you could take us to see one of the old fae. You meant that?" "So, you were listening," she teased. "I'm a lot of things, Cowboy, but I ain't a liar. I said I can take you to the old fae. I meant it. But we'll need to leave now. This one only ever shows at dawn, so we best get moving." And with that, she trotted her horse past us and a little further down the river. We watched her for a moment before forming up behind her as she led us out of the town. I'm sure the idea that this was some sort of trick crossed our minds, but given our lack of other options, none of us spoke up about it. Up ahead, about a half an hour out of town, I could see a grove of trees, and she was headed straight for it. At its edge, she dismounted her horse and tied it to the tree before fixing her hat. She waited for the rest of us to dismount as well. "Stick behind me because this path is precise," Michaela said. "You need to follow it exactly. Go where I go, walk where I walk, and whatever you do, don't get lost because if you do, there's not a thing in all creation that'll save you. If you're having second thoughts, I recommend you speak now, because once we start, we will not stop." "You said this is the only way we can find out where Kenneth went," Starkman said. "You meant that?" "I did," she replied. "Then we don't have a choice. Take us to the fae." And Michaela's smile faded, just for a moment, before she turned and stared into the woods. And Starkman was the first to follow, with me, Cooper, and Henry staying behind him. I hadn't imagined that little patch of woods would be all that thick, and yet as we followed Michaela, it just seemed to go deeper and deeper inside. And looking up, I saw that the sky above seemed darker than before, and the air seemed quiet and heavy. No birds, no animals, nothing at all. Starkman kept his eyes ahead, following our fae guide through the twists and turns of the forest, but Cooper's eyes wandered. The trees seemed taller and thicker. It it also looked dried out, as if they were dead. From the corner of my eye, I could have sworn I saw movement in the shadows. Shapes of things I couldn't quite name, climbing on trees as if they were trying to get a look at us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, I heard Henry whispering, but his prayer sounded empty and echoed through the forest. Our prayers won't do you no good here, Henry, Michaela warned, her voice a cold whisper. Nothing here will hear them as anything more than a dinner bell. And the old guards of the forest don't listen to the begging of whelps. Henry's mumbled prayer died in his throat, and he stopped in his tracks for a moment before scrambling not to be left behind. Pale and luminous mushrooms dotted the forest floor ahead of us, offering the only light in that dark, otherworldly place we were in. Not even our own footsteps seemed to make a sound anymore, and for what felt like hours, all was silent, until at last we heard running water. The woods opened up into a clearing. It was dark as night. I could see the pond in the center of it, only because of the tranquil surface of the water reflected the little dots of light from countless glowing mushrooms like stars. It was as if someone had poured the night sky itself into a cup, although far more beautiful. Michaela lingered near the edge of the clearing, refusing to set foot any further in, and by the look on her face, I knew it was because even she feared what we were about to face. It knows you're here, she said. Go on, go to it and be respectful. And Starkman was the first to enter the clearing. He rounded the pond, staring down at it for a moment before looking around. He didn't see the water swelling as something deep within began to rise from the depths.
Has the world fallen into such a state that the sisters of the Rio Grande do not even offer up greetings when leading strangers into our midst?
A voice hissed, and Starkman turned to see what Cooper and I had already noticed. A shape emerged from the water. At a glance, I thought it was some sort of wolf or a coyote, but it was far too large. Its dark fur was matted with moss and algae, and while the patches on its body, there was no fur. It looked like bulwood. It had a fiery glow to them, as if they were burning from inside out. I could have sworn I saw eyes blinking in amongst that glow, but I never got close enough to see for sure. I meant no offense, great guardian of these woods, Michaela stammered. These men insisted. They come seeking information.
Do they?
The great beast asked. Its head shifted to focus on Michaela, eyes burning into her. She knelt to bow, keeping her head low until it seemed satisfied. And then its attention turned to us.
And what information is it that you seek?
The ritual forbidden by Charles, Starkman said. The one that draws power from it. How is it performed?
You tamper with a force that is far beyond you, human.
The old Fae hissed.
You would not be wise to deal with the Destroyer.
We're not the ones dealing with her, Cooper said. But there's a lady out there who is, and if we don't stop her, I'm willing to bet what she'll do ain't gonna be any better for you than it is for us. And there was a low, deep rumble that shook the earth beneath us, and laughter.
We are beyond your world, human, beyond your petty struggles. The doomed effort of apotheosis of one human is of no concern to us. If Charles discovers her, her fate is already sealed. You waste your time. Leave this place.
The old Fate turned as if it was about to return to the water, but I called out to it. This isn't just some woman. We've seen things she's done. She's already drawn some power out of Charles. God only knows what else she's capable of. When the beast was stopped and was silent for a moment.
You speak of Primrose Kennard,
It said after a few moments. I do. The creature huffed before fixing its eyes on me.
Ill tidings, indeed. There is a chance Charles may destroy her, but Kennard's dealings go deeper than most humans. If you are so committed to learning the ritual, I will tell you what you need to know. But a price must be paid.
And what price might that be? I asked.
Information. This precious requires something precious in return. I see you, Roy Wilson. I see what you hold dear. You may have what you seek, but only in return for what you hold so close to your heart.
The eyes burned into mine, and in them I could see Sarah's face. I could see Jack. I opened my mouth, ready to say no, but the words, they caught in my throat. And with just one simple word, I was about to lose everything that ever mattered to me. In exchange for what? Stopping some old mad witch? Could I really say it? What about what's close to my heart? A voice said, still in the old phase of tension before I could give my answer. The creature looked over, fixing its eyes upon Marshal Cooper. Would that be enough for you? He asked.
Harrison Cooper. How interesting. You would give up what you held most dear to me, all for one shot at Primrose Kennard.
I would, Cooper said. Now do what you've got to do, and tell us what we need to know. And the great creature chuckled again, eyes remaining fixed on Cooper.
Very well then. Our contract is sealed.
It said, and I could hear a cold glee in its voice.
Now, the apotheosis ritual. It cannot be performed inside the mortal realm. No. To draw such power from Charles, one must gain access into the abyss, Charles' realm. Getting there will not be easy. Its temples are spread thin, yet one exists close by, buried under rock and time in the Chisos. Kennard is there now and grows ever closer to her prize. Through the temple, she shall enter the abyss. Once she is inside, she will grow more powerful by the moment. I know of no way to stop this, beyond drawing the attention of Charles, which is most unwise. Should Charles find you, even I could not say what they will do. Yet I know your fates would make death seem envious. You must destroy Kennard or the temple before she enters the abyss. And after that, it will be too late.
So, the Chisos Mountains, Cooper said. That's where she is?
Move quickly. She will reach the temple soon. Then, it is in the hands of fate.
The beast said as it turned to descend back into the pond. We watched as it vanished beneath the surface of the water, leaving it still and tranquil once again. And Cooper's breathing sounded heavier than usual. He looked unsteady on his feet, and I ran to his side to grab him before he collapsed. We got what we came for, Starkman said. We should move, now. Give him a minute, I said. Marshal, what the hell did you give that thing? The only thing I ever cared about, he replied. There was a new wheeze in his breath, and I could have sworn that his skin looked white as a sheet. It's all about the chase, Roy. It's always been about the chase. He steadied himself on his feet. Don't think too much on it. We all make our last ride eventually. And if we're lucky, we go out in a blaze of glory. Michaela, take us back to town. We'll need to pick up some supplies. I'd say I still got one last ride left in me, and I'm gonna make it count. And smiling that same boyish smile he always wore, Harrison Cooper started back towards the woods. Even Michaela shrank back a step from him, watching him as he started back the way we'd come. The trip back out of the woods went even faster than the trip in, but that ride back into Del Rio felt like it took ages. Cooper almost looked as if he'd aged 50 years. He didn't need to say a word for me to know that he was suffering. Tomorrow morning, we ride for the Chisos Mountains to finish this for good. And I know it'll be Cooper's last. Hell, it might be the last for all of us.